If you're hearing this, you have made it to our Season 2 finale. Unless, of course, you've just stumbled across the podcast, and in which case, I advise you to go back and start from episode 1. This story is better listened to in order. But if you have indeed made it to the end, and you do enjoy our show, and you haven't already, I would ask that you please press pause now and like or review us. I would also ask that you consider telling your friends about us to get them interested. Podcast marketing is a tough gig, and any help that you can give is greatly appreciated. And now that shameless sales pitch is over, on with the show. All events depicted in this podcast are real. However, the names, locations, and some details have been changed for the privacy of those involved. Hello and welcome to Season 2, Episode 9 of Walking on Eggshells with an Emotional Vampire, a podcast that above all things is about family. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, we are good.
Hear me?
I can hear you, I can. While I was editing the last episode, I received an email from a gentleman at Warren Publishing asking if the sisters and I were interested in interviewing one of their new authors. Are you recording?
I haven't stopped recording since you pressed it.
Awesome. So we're all recording?
Hang on a sec, I'm not recording yet.
Okay, that's all right. It's not like I'm going to use any of this or anything. The request from the publisher came at a good time because we are in the process of organising interviews for the upcoming season. And as you probably know from the pre-roll, in Season 3, we are planning to tell other people's dysfunctional family stories, not just our own. All right, so we don't have a lot of time here because we've left this a bit late, but did either of you read the press release that I sent you?
No.
No.
Beautiful.
Well, you didn't really give us much, research material.
I sent you the bio, the press release.
Didn't have time.
And when I flipped through the press release for this book, which by the way is called Dismantle, I was engaged by the story that it told, and I knew that I would love to have the opportunity to interview its author, Angie Kiehne, at some point. Anyway, I read the press release, and the cool thing is that a lot of the stuff in there seems to relate to us, directly to us. But the reason why I felt compelled to rush Angie's interview as my Season 2 finale, and not just wait to talk to her in Season 3, came less from the outline of her book, and more from what I inferred when I read between the lines. One of the things that's in there is it says that she was raised in an ashram.
Oh, I did read that.
So this is the thing. I feel like ashram is one of those things where you always hear about them, but no one actually knows what they are. Do you actually know what an ashram is?
No.
I'm going to Google it.
And no, this reason does not have anything to do with an ashram. But it's an Indian thing, right? There's something Indian about it.
Yeah, it sounds Indian.
That's probably racist.
I don't think it is. I think it's an Indian retreat, like a meditation retreat or something.
That really is racist.
No. But for some reason, on the limited prep time that I had with the sisters before Angie would join the call, an ashram was all that we seemed able to talk about.
You're talking about like a Native American?
Native American?
No, Indian as in Mumbai Indian, right?
That's that sort of thing. I think of an ashram, I think of like an Indian yogi, you know? Well, an ashram and Yogi Bear, that is.
A yogi is like a spiritual person. Is that what a yogi is?
I just keep thinking of Yogi Bear.
Was Yogi Bear like an Aussie thing though, or was that?
No, Yogi, because he's got an American accent. Hey, hey, hey. But that's Fat Albert. It's not your picnic basket. Is that the thing? Hey, boo boo. Hey, boo boo. That's American. That's
it's American because he's a bear in America stealing picnics.
That's right. He's in Yellowstone Park, isn't he?
Yeah. Yellowstone, getting the
picnics.
Yeah.
Is that where he is?
In fact, when it did come time to patch Angie into the call, it seems like we had discussed everything except the topic that I was most interested in. The same thing. You know, there's a baseball player called Yogi Berra.
Stop it. There is not.
And we will get to that topic.
There is. Oh my god!
No, it's a thing. A few minutes into the interview. Anyway, I think it's actually time to patch Angie in. What the fuck? We didn't even prepare anything.
Ashram and a yogi.
Yeah, that's it.
Got it covered.
Oh well, I guess I'll just patch her in there. We'll see how we go. And I'll spare you the technical difficulties that ensued.
Hello, Angie.
Hello, Angie. Are you there? I don't think she's there. And transport you directly to the moment when we got our shit together.
Okay,
here we go. We're live.
Awesome.
Yay.
We did it.
Yay!
We actually did it.
It actually worked.
Very good.
So I don't know if you listen to our podcast or not. I have no or know much of it. Or...
I did listen to a couple of episodes. Love the idea that you came up with, and I wish I had thought of the same thing with my sister, because I think we had a lot in my family to kind of like try and figure out with each sibling knowing different things. But yeah, your podcast is fantastic. I'm very excited to be talking to you three.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
How many siblings do you have?
I have 4, but I only talk to one of them regularly anyways.
Do you get along with the other ones?
So one is iffy. He's maybe on the fence, and then the other 2 I'm not really on speaking terms with.
Oh, it kind of is like our family, actually. It sort of goes like that.
It really is.
Yeah.
It goes up and down. All right, maybe we'll come back to that. So you've written a book called Dismantle.
Yes.
I haven't read the book. I apologize. I did read the press release for it. It was pretty cool. Your agent got in touch with me, which was really cool as well, because I don't know, it was exciting to see someone's agent get in touch with me, because I was like, oh, this person must be very important. Your laughing emphasizes that you are very important, I guess.
Oh my goodness. That's funny that you look at it that way, but I love that. If it seems like your first guests that are reaching out are coming through an agent, and that feels very important, I think that's a great way to kick off your next season.
Yeah, that's what we thought as well. Well, and also I don't know, it's just we made a podcast about our family issues, and you wrote a book about them, so it seems like you kind of did the same thing. Maybe you might even be further along the path than we are. And just to clarify, as a guy who releases a podcast under a fake name for fear of being discovered, this next part of the interview is what I had been anticipating the most. So, does your family, or like your parents, or whoever the book is about, do they know about the book?
So I am estranged from both of my parents, and I knew once the book came out anyways, they would never speak to me again. And so I already made my peace with that. But I heard from one of my siblings that my mother had indeed found out about the book because she follows me on social media. And there's no way to hide something like that. So, yeah, she is aware of it. She's very angry about it. I don't know if my father ever found out about it. But
wow, that's crazy.
At least I'm not getting angry calls from them because we don't speak at all. So I'm just kind of hearing these things through the grapevine. But
I mean, I'm not going to say it's great for you. That's the wrong way to put that. But because we obviously still have a relationship with the parents. So it's kind of like we're living double lives here. So even me advertising the podcast to people, I have to be really careful about it. So we obviously use fake names and things. So I don't think any of us have the strength to just come out and openly do it. So it's pretty awesome that you actually just said, okay, I'm going to release this book, and then that's it.
Yeah, it took a long time. Yeah, it took me like a year or more to come to terms with it, because I kept wondering whether I should use a pseudonym. But ultimately, in order to publish a book and get on anyone's radar, you really need to be on social media. And so it would be hard to have a pseudonym, but there's your picture there. So what I did was ultimately, I got divorced last year, and I changed my surname to something brand new. It's not my maiden name. And then I did change the names of everyone in the book. So technically speaking, it still kind of protects their privacy, but anyone who knows me knows the book is about my family, and obviously everyone in my family can see that's kind of all of our dirty laundry on display. But for me, it was just, I felt this inner drive to share my truth, and I couldn't quiet that voice in my head that, I've got to get this down on paper.
And do you have is there a purpose for the book? I mean, you wanted to get the truth out. Was that your main purpose for getting the book out, or is there more to it? Or
ultimately, what I needed was closure, and I can't get it from either of my parents because they refuse to talk honestly about how things fell apart in my family, and my parents refuse to take accountability for how their divorce and the subsequent neglect of their children kind of shaped the rest of our lives. And so in order for me to find that closure, I felt strongly I needed to write this book because I kind of needed to understand why they made the choices that they made. And so it was a journey of me going through memory to write down everything I remembered. And then I had someone else in my family read the book and kind of confirm that my memories were accurate, and then fill in some of the blanks. And then ultimately, once the book was finished, I felt like this huge weight was lifted off my shoulders. Like I didn't need to live in that shame anymore or keep feeling the grief, because it really was like a daily grieving process for me, that childhood that I lost. And so in the end, it ended up being very healing.
This is very close to us.
Yeah.
So I couldn't, at first anyway, I definitely couldn't articulate why we were doing the podcast. But then as it went along, we seemed to get more and more from it. And it was this search to find out, like the thing that I always get is I always feel paranoid that I'm being overly sensitive. And so if and when you listen to the podcast, there's a lot of times where I'll have the conversation, but then I'll look back on it and then I'll lay the blame all on me. I'll be like, I'm being too sensitive, or this is all my fault.
Right.
But then I'll force myself to go back and then really analyze everything that happened. And the thing about it is that the retelling of the story, it always seems much crazier than I remember.
Right.
And usually after going through that process and retelling everything, then I usually come to a place where I still might think that, you know, maybe I'm being overly sensitive, but I get to a place where I'm sort of comfortable talking about it and I feel better about the whole thing.
Yeah, I like that. That's great. I mean, I think anything that you can do to heal on your own is so important, because if you can't get that from your parents, you need to get it from somewhere. And so it's almost like you kind of have to parent yourself a little bit to work through this grieving process.
And I think like even you know, like writing it down and stuff, like, you know, I know when I was younger, I used to have a diary and I used to actually write stuff down, and it was almost like I was taking that weight off my shoulders. I'd write it down into like a diary or a book, and it felt like it was almost gone, not gone, but you know what I mean. It was less.
You know, Mum definitely read that.
Yeah, I know she did. Yeah.
She would have. Did she read it? She
No,
would have
I
for
had
She
sure.
read my diary. I had to throw them out. I hid it in my room, and I made sure I put like tape on it.
Did
or
you put a
something.
hair across, like the detective when you put the hair across the drawer?
I can't remember exactly what I did, but I did something to know whether or not someone had opened it. And then I just burnt my diaries because I was like, well, there's no privacy here.
Oh my goodness.
All right, before because I do want to get into more of this stuff, because I find this really interesting, but I don't know a lot about your book. I don't know how much when you're on a book tour or whatever it is that you're doing and you're doing press. I don't know if you're supposed to talk about what's in the book or you're just supposed to give snippets. But what stuff can you tell us about the book, or what's the dot points or the headlines?
We can do this any way you want. As far as a book tour, that hasn't quite kicked off yet. And so, yeah, we can delve into the whole thing. It's all game for chatting about. So it basically spans the ages of approximately 8 to 18, and so I wanted to sort of chart the unusual nature of my childhood, because from ages 0 to 12, I actually had a very lovely, idyllic childhood in a very small town in New England. I did change the location of the book, so I say it's Vermont. And it was, by all accounts, a normal, loving, wholesome childhood. And then my parents didn't make a lot of money. They had an in-home bakery and basically made enough to pay the bills. But we didn't really want for anything. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, my mother decided she didn't want to live in that small town anymore running a bakery. She wanted to move to Seattle. And I've never really been able to figure out why she decided to make that giant change. One thing that she had kind of helping her decide this was she had an older sister who lived out there, and her older sister was already living what appeared to be a very glamorous lifestyle. And so we headed out west, and then basically the title of my book is Dismantle, because from that first action of moving out to the West Coast, it drastically changed everything in our lives and just started dismantling the family unit, the loving, healthy relationship that I thought we had with our parents, the loving relationship between them. Ultimately, they struggled financially because we ended up moving to an area that was one of the most expensive parts of the entire country. And this is back in 1989, mind you, so they couldn't look things up on the internet. They didn't have any knowledge, and they'd never been there before. They'd never even visited there. So they just did this out of the blue, didn't realize they're moving to the most expensive town in the country. They couldn't afford it. And so we had to keep moving and keep moving and keep moving. And then I think partially it was the financial stresses that were causing a rift between them. Like my dad had to take on a second job and he wasn't around a lot anymore. And then another change that came out of the blue was my mother announced that she was going to become a bodybuilder.
Oh, that's cool.
Oh my god.
Well,
Sorry, I'm into the bodybuilding stuff, so maybe it's not cool.
it was not in line with how we perceived her at all. It was the most bizarre thing. And so she's working with a trainer to become more muscular. She was going to compete in a competition, and my dad was basically repulsed by it. I think of all of us, he was the most mystified. And then I think the one thing I'll mention that I wrote in my book was by the time I was 14, we were living in a hovel, like this horrible house. It was not somewhere that anyone would want to live. It was not desirable at all. So we're living there, and my mom's gone all the time because she's constantly with a personal trainer. And I walk into the kitchen one evening, and I see my dad's cooking dinner, and he looks really angry. And my dad and I were always very close. And so I'm like, hey, what's up, Dad? And he says, your mother cheated on me.
Oh
And I was like, what? No. What? Like, where are you getting this from?
my god.
Yeah. And he's like, she just told me. And I'm like, no. And in my head, I'm thinking, he's like way off base. He must have misunderstood. So I left the kitchen and went to go find my mom. And we had never really been very close. Like, I was always a daddy's girl from my youngest memories. But I went into her room and I saw her sitting at the side of her bed, weeping silently. And I just went and sat next to her and put my arm around her. And I was like, hey, Mom, it's going to be okay. I'd like to be friends with you. And I don't even know why I said that at the moment. I guess I just was trying to say something about, like, I was there for her. And she was like, yeah, I would like that. And I didn't ask her if she had cheated on my dad, because for me, I was like, obviously she hasn't. Anyway, fast forward a few months, she's becoming more and more detached from the family, and she eventually moves out and gets her own apartment. And then she starts being honest with us all. And she tells us she did in fact cheat on my father with her personal trainer. They're having an ongoing relationship, and my whole life was just blown to smithereens, because I thought my parents were very much in love. I never felt safe again, because it felt like, how did I not know any of this was coming? Like, it was just, yeah. So basically, they split up, and then they both became so self-absorbed that they neglected their 5 children. Neither of them wanted children anymore. So I just kind of like write about all of this in the book and try to untangle all this and figure out, what was going on in their heads. Why did they think that it was okay to make the decisions they made? And, they exposed us to things that were not appropriate at all for children that young.
How old were they?
I guess they would have been like, well, my dad was 7 years older than my mom, so I think she was like mid-30s, and he was probably like, just around 40-ish.
Old enough to know better, I guess.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, because I think because we have a divorce, that's a lot of when I go back, a lot of the things happen to do with the divorce and the parents not liking each other. But I think divorce really fucks people's brains up completely.
Yeah.
Yeah, or separation. I don't know if they got divorced. They were married, yes?
Yeah, at first it was just, they were just separated. And I think it took like another couple of years before they either sought a lawyer. I don't know if they could afford the representation at the time, but it was another couple of years before the divorce went through.
I've got to ask, because it's in the press release. So there's a bit where it says that you lived in an ashram.
Yeah, so that was in the Northeast, where we grew up in New England. We lived right next to an ashram, and so that was a big part of our childhood. It was like a spiritual community that we were a part of that made us feel very welcomed and normalized, whereas that was part of what we lost when we moved across the country.
Oh.
What is an ashram? Like, we were talking about this before, because it's one of those things you hear, but I have no idea. All we could come up with is that it's like some sort of spiritual retreat and yogi. For some reason, we thought maybe there was a yogi there or something.
Yes, you're on the right track. It's basically a spiritual center. It could be one building. It could be sort of a compound where you have, like a worship hall and other buildings. It's basically a place where people would come together to worship an Indian guru.
And that's like your 0 to 10, going from the ashram to Seattle.
Yes.
And I gotta say, I've been to Seattle. I love that city, man. Like the fish markets, it's the first Starbucks there. Pearl Jam comes from there. Like, yeah, I had an awesome time in Seattle.
Yeah.
It's fine when you're not living in a hovel.
Yeah, I guess. I guess.
Yeah, great.
Yeah,
that is
exactly.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so is there anything else you want to go through about what happened with the parents when you moved to Seattle?
Once my mother left my father, she went through a sexual revolution. It was like the 60s for her. And she wasn't private about anything. She didn't keep anything secret from her kids. And so there was a constant stream of men coming into our apartment. They'd go into their bedroom and we'd be on our own to, feed ourselves or, keep ourselves occupied. And it felt really gross. Worst of all, she'd make us meet each of these men. So like I had to shake all these guys' hands and I'd be like, what, just grossed out. Like what kind of a man goes to a woman's house to have sex with her when her young children are like on the other side of the wall? I mean, these are small apartments.
And then shakes their hands.
Yeah. It was so icky. So I have a very negative association with cologne because these guys would come over with cologne and they'd shake my hand and then my hand would smell like them and I'd just like be so grossed out that I'd like go wash my hands really quickly. And so I just associated that with, sort of sex on the fly, like they were just getting together in our apartment. And meanwhile, at that same time that I had been living with my dad and then I chose to move in with my mom, and it was a very confusing time to be living with her and seeing all this because I was going through puberty at that same time. And then I was repulsed by men. I was repulsed by the idea of sex or relationships or any of that. Like I feared all of it because to me, that just seemed like something wild, out of control. It ruins your life. And then, as I mentioned before, I had always been a daddy's girl. Like I loved my father so much. I thought the world of him. I really thought he was the most intelligent person, the most wonderful person on earth. And as he was getting more and more depressed, he just withdrew. And then he suddenly seemed to have his attention really, like he was really preoccupied. And I was so naive, I didn't figure it out for a long time that he had a coworker who had also gone through a divorce. And him and this woman started a relationship. And he never announced it to us. We didn't know. She didn't come around the house. So I had no idea. But he was like super preoccupied with that. And so every time he could get out of the house early to go to work, he would do so. And so whether I was at his house or my mother's house, I was constantly being used against my will to take care of my younger children so that they could just,
hook up, right?
Yeah, so they could go do whatever they wanted.
So did all your siblings move at the same time as you did, or did they get split up between the parents?
They got split up, and we just constantly kept cycling back and forth between each house. So, like, you'd have some number of kids staying with my mom, and then somebody would have a fallout with her, and then they'd have to go back to my dad's house. And so it was just like this constant shuffle between the two houses. And then some of my siblings just spent more of their time at friends' houses, honestly, than at home.
Sounds super unhealthy.
Right.
You've got like no stability and stuff.
Right. And so I was living in a lot of fear, like I said, being agoraphobic, feeling like I was unsafe at home. And then I finally decided to like take my life into my own hands and move back to the East Coast. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go back to my original community. This is not healthy for me to stay with these parents. And so I chose to move back and lived with host families so that I could go back to the school that was there at the ashram. And
you went back to the ashram. That's awesome.
Yeah, it is. I really I have wonderful memories associated with it. The spiritual philosophy that we followed was all about peace, being kind to others. And I always feel wonderful when I'm there on the property. And then they had a private K-12 school on the very same property. So I went there for my junior and senior year, which made a huge difference in my life. That really kind of turned things around for me. But it was also at the same time very emotional because I was away from my siblings. I was constantly worrying about them. And so it was very tumultuous for me emotionally. But yeah, it was the best decision I could have made in terms of, how to properly take care of myself.
Is that where Like the animosity, you've got some of the siblings who you're not talking to. Does it come from that? Like they're still bitter about you leaving?
No, no, it's more about, for some reason, two of my siblings really protect my mother. Like they kind of act like nothing really happened. It wasn't that big of a deal. And, so they, I don't know. It's just been some awkward conversations where like they don't want to go there with me. Like the way that you three have this podcast where you're like trying to put your puzzle pieces together and figure it out together. Like two of them are very defensive of my mom. And I think like, in families where say like the parents were, alcoholics or drug users or whatever, I think kids will tend to try to protect their parents in that way. So maybe it was like that, but yeah, there's only one of my siblings that is willing to acknowledge everything that happened as it happened. And, the two of us have chosen to go to therapy, do the work to process and grieve through these experiences and come out the other side healthier. The rest have chosen not to seek therapy or really do anything about it.
At least there's another one of you, so you don't feel like you're alone or you're crazy or anything.
Right. Right.
That's
Okay.
like nice. It's what we've got with each other.
Yeah. So I know my reasons for making the podcast have always been very selfish. I never thought about helping other people or anything like that. But then recently in this season, we did an episode with a clinical psychologist named Terry, and she was amazing. And when we spoke on that episode, Ellie talked about how the podcast had helped her, and it started making me think like maybe there could be a greater purpose for the podcast, something that would actually help people.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you had that idea with your book as well, or if that ever came about. I think you're further along the progression than we are with your book, because you've told other people, you've opened it up to the family and everything like that, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
We're never going to be there to tell mum and dad.
No. We won't.
Well, I think, in writing this book, I actually did do a memoir writing class after I'd started the book on my own at home, and I kind of felt like I'd hit a plateau and I needed some help. So I did this memoir writing class, and the teacher talked about how you can't publish a book just based on like woe is me stories. That's not going to sell. It's not going to interest anybody. So it needs to be a very genuine telling of your story that will have enough relatable instances, like, maybe other people haven't grown up on an ashram, but they would understand those emotions that I had about being forced to leave my wonderful childhood home and then everything falling apart. And so you need to find a way to turn that story of misery into something that is relatable to others. They can see that, I made healthy choices, right? Instead of turning towards like drugs or, there's 1,000 different ways I could have turned to self-harm. As we've seen like throughout history, what would normally happen to kids that have bad parents. And instead I chose to take certain steps that would ensure I was taking care of myself and setting myself up for a better future. So I do hope that will be a takeaway to other people who are reading the book, and maybe if they're still in a situation like that at home, and realizing that they can take control and make their own best decisions for themselves if their parents aren't having their best interests at heart.
I think it's really interesting what you're saying about telling a relatable story, because I feel like that's what's happened with our podcast. So we've got a ton of emails from people telling us their stories and how they relate to ours. Some of them incredibly funny, some of them incredibly moving. It's actually been really overwhelming. And it's what gave me the idea that we should open up the podcast in season 3 to tell other people's stories rather than just our own. And the podcast it's always going to be this inherently selfish thing, because I get a lot from it, and it's the reason deep down why I do it. But I think if I could create this database of guests who can potentially be in communication with each other and support each other, I think that could be a net positive and could be a really good thing.
I love that. I mean, yeah, I have to say that I think one of the common, just like you said, you would never be able to tell your parents about your podcast. There's so much shame and guilt wrapped up in this, where you feel like you had this crummy childhood. You dealt with a lot of things that you shouldn't have. but yet it's like, you can't speak about it because you don't want to throw your parents under the bus like that, or it's embarrassing for you or whatever. I think that by us sharing our stories, there's strength through making yourself vulnerable. And then as you're sharing with each other, you're realizing, I'm not alone. Other people have gone through this. And it is interesting to hear where different people have taken their lives, what decisions they've made to better themselves and better their situation. So, yeah, I think what you're doing with the podcast is fantastic. And I think you do stand to help a lot of people not feel so alone.
That's what I want to hear. That's
Yeah,
a good
Lucas
message.
is so happy right now.
Yes, I also have this thing all the time. I feel like you were saying, you can't write a book or tell a story when it's just a poor me story.
Yeah.
And I always feel like every episode I feel like I'm just complaining. Nothing was that bad, and I always feel like that. And then worry that people will just be like, listen to this guy whining about his not that bad childhood all the time.
Well, I will say, speaking to your fear about people thinking you're complaining, what I love that you guys are doing is that you're unpacking what happened. And so you're saying, here's what happened in my timeline, and then, so each of you is kind of contributing to it. And so what you're doing is you're speaking the truth. And by speaking the truth, you're not complaining, right? You're just explaining, you're telling the facts, right? Here's what happened. And then your listener can take away from it what they will. And I think what I'm always driving towards is, where can I wring some humor out of this, right? Like in my book, there's some tearjerker moments, but there's also stories that are so ridiculous that I'm hoping the reader will laugh about it. And so, definitely I think some of the moments you guys have shared have that same effect, right? Of like, let's try and laugh at this if we can, right? So it's not so much complaining, it's not so much just woe is me.
This is one of my biggest things. It is this idea that it's okay to joke about it, even like inappropriately joke about it, because it's fine. I've got a lady that I'm talking to. I think she's going to be on a future episode, but she was talking about how she was in AA, and nothing against AA meetings, but she said that they're very, very serious. And she said with her siblings, when she talks about with her brother, they joke about it in the same way that we do on the podcast. And it's one of the things that drawn her to it, because she said it wasn't that same like solemn telling. She needed something where she could laugh about it and joke about it. So I'm really big on that. You do stand-up comedy, right?
Yeah, so that actually came out of this.
Man, I would love to do stand-up comedy. It's like, I think it's one of those things I would get addicted to, because I do trainings at work, like I run trainings, and I write them like it's a comedy routine. Like I put jokes into them. And I do multiple of them. And so when I do them, if I don't get a good reaction, if I have a bad set of trainings, I'll be like, the audience didn't get this one, and I'll tweak it for the next one and try and get as many laughs. I know it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
I love that.
Don't stroke his ego. Oh my God.
But yeah, like my favorite thing on earth is when I say something inappropriate and the person is disgusted. I find that so hilarious. I do it with the sisters all the time. And especially when you have an audience and at first they're disgusted, but then they come around and they find it funny. That's like gold for me.
Yes.
I don't know if that comes from my childhood or not.
Probably.
But how did you come into stand up?
So there was a couple of different things. One was, I think I felt my parents were completely disinterested in me when I was a teenager. Like it felt like neither one had any interest in knowing me anymore. And so there was like that sort of desperate need for some sort of external validation. That's what prompted me to go up on stage. But also it was growing up with parents like that. They had no boundaries. And so I didn't know what healthy boundaries looked like. And so even when I did share stories about what was going on at home with my peers, they would be like, what are you talking about? Like they would look at me like I was an alien. And I was like, is this strange? This is odd. And so I think after mulling that over for a while, I was like, I think a lot of these stories are so preposterous that they're actually humorous. And so my very first set was a roast of my mom. It was basically like a 6-minute mini condensed version of my memoir. And the audience was like, oh my gosh, like they were riveted. There was a lot of gasping, but there was also a lot of laughter, and it went over really well.
After the interview, I managed to hunt down the exact set that Angie is talking about here on her Instagram. And it pretty much goes as she explains.
So, my mother and I are estranged.
And remember when I said that comedy gold for me is when the audience turns from disgust to laughter?
It's really hard to find her Mother's Day card. They don't make one that says, "Happy Mother's Day, I wish I'd been aborted."
Well, there's a lot of that in there, which I do appreciate.
Okay. Meanwhile, my mom told me not to leave my panties in the family laundry basket, otherwise her lover would sniff them. Yeah, I was like, gross, what's he punishing himself for?
But probably my favourite thing about the recording is that throughout the entire routine, you can see Angie checking her notes, which appear to be written on the palm of her hand. It gives her a slightly nervous but endearing quality that I think adds to the performance. And if you want to check it out for yourself, I'll leave the link to her Instagram in the description. But for now, let's go back to the interview.
And it went over really well, and I came off the stage with a complete high, and I was like, well, there it is. Like, I've really ripped the Band-Aid off. I've gone on stage. It's been recorded. I shared all those details with the world, and there's something especially thrilling about doing stand-up in Manhattan, because if that's where you would need to make it ultimately. If you can get through telling jokes to a New York City audience without getting booed off, or they're worse, they're being silenced. It's a good thing. So yeah, I derived a lot of joy from that. It felt very validating, and I did that for about a year when my schedule allowed for me to do open mics, and I haven't felt as drawn to it lately. I've been kind of tapping into other areas of creativity. But I really did enjoy it, and ultimately it had been at the top of my bucket list for a long time after my divorce. And even though you're terrified, you do it, and then each time becomes a little bit easier. And fortunately, when I watched the recordings, the fear that I felt on the inside did not come through. I was actually able to perform, looking like I wasn't shaking, looking like I didn't have terror in my eyes. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. If you have any inclination to do it, I highly encourage you to.
Maybe I'll look into
no.
it. Okay. What about you, Ari? Would you do it?
No.
Never?
No, that's terrifying.
What about you, Ellie? Would you do it?
No, I wouldn't do it either.
Okay, so it's just me. I'm the attention whore of the three of us.
Yeah, just you.
Just you.
I think everybody knew that already, so that's fine. So one of the things I wanted to get into, as I mentioned before, we got a clinical psychologist on the show, and because we had tried to diagnose Mum with borderline personality disorder, and after talking to Terry, she actually changed my mind. I don't think Mum has borderline personality disorder anymore. I actually think she leans more narcissistic, but that's a whole other thing. Did you go down that path? Did you try and psychoanalyze your parents?
I was definitely hoping to figure that out. I was like, can I be like an armchair psychologist and diagnose my mother as I write this book and like unpack all this? But I also thought maybe she had borderline personality disorder. But I would love to get it into the hands of an actual psychologist or psychiatrist and have them tell me. But I wasn't able to come to any real conclusions on that. And the other thing I'll mention is when I was in the memoir writing class, you would be required to circulate a chapter of whatever you were working on with the rest of the group, and their homework would be to read it and then be prepared to speak at the next session about it. And all these other students always ask me, but why did your mother do it? Like, what was she after? Was she trying to find a good stepfather for you kids, or like what was her reasoning? And I'm like, it's so nuts to me, like how it was like they wanted an answer right then. They wanted an answer that made sense. And I'm like, this is why I'm writing the book, because there is no obvious answer. It doesn't make sense. And with the way my mom was behaving, again, it was a sexual revolution. It was not her trying to find a stepfather for us. And in fact, when she finally found the one man who we genuinely loved and we would have really wanted him to be our stepfather, she broke up with him. And so there's no clean answer as to the why of everything she decided to do. And so, yeah.
It's why Hannibal Lecter's a great character, because you don't know why he eats people, he just does it, Not that your mum is Hannibal Lecter, but,
Yeah, I think sometimes there's just not an answer, but at least by writing the book, I got the closest thing to closure I could possibly have. And Yeah, I think if I was wealthy, I would probably say, here's a $10,000 prize to whoever can diagnose my mother. Like, because I really am curious.
Well, that's what I got from the episode with Terry. I think I was hoping that we just hear that Mum has this disorder, borderline personality disorder.
Mm-hmm.
That's what she has. But then what Terry taught us was that all of these disorders, they're just theorized constructs. They're not even a physical thing. They're just a construct of a thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, probably like our mum, your mum probably just has a mix of all different things, all these different characteristics. So
Right.
yeah, you probably wouldn't even get a diagnosis.
I'm leaning more to Mum being more narcissistic. She's a lot more selfish than borderline personality. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right too. Like borderline personality disorder, it feels like they really get caught in their emotions. So I mean, yeah, I think that makes sense. Not that I'm a professional or anything. Like, I've had one conversation with one therapist about borderline personality disorder one time. So, but yeah, sounds right to me. Angie, you are awesome. I'm looking at my notes here, and I've gotten through everything I need to ask. I don't know if maybe Aria, do you have any questions for Angie?
I don't know. It's
Come
just
on, Aria. Jeez, what are you doing? Get it. She's come on here to talk to us, and now you can't even ask her a damn question. What the hell?
I'm trying to think. You put me on the spot because I was just like happy, like listening to everything.
Well, this is not passive. You have to work here as well.
Okay,
It's on
I've
you
got.
too.
So how old were you when you like decided that you were trying to figure out what the parents actually like did or like?
Yeah. So I think I felt like a mess for a long time. Like in my early 20s, I used to go to bed crying every night, and I was married by then, and I would just like lay in bed weeping, and my husband would just have to hold me, and I would just cry and cry and cry and cry because of how heartbroken I was that my parents had treated me and my siblings this way, and my other siblings struggled so much with depression and unemployment and just all these things that I knew were directly a result of our, of our bad childhoods, right? And so I had to first like get past the fact that I could just like weep about it and just be so broken up about it. I couldn't make heads or tails of what was going on in my head. And then I started talk therapy. Eventually I went on antidepressants, and I wrote my first chapter in 2006, and I thought it was going to be a blog post. And I thought in my head, okay, I'm going to write every memory. Yeah, I was like, I'm going to write every memory I have, and I'm going to just try to come at it like 100% from like a humorous angle. Like, and as I was writing more and more, I was like, you know what? Like, not all of this is funny, and not all of this can be told through a comedic lens. And so I kind of had to like pause and think about it some more. And so it wasn't until 2017 that I actually started writing this book in earnest.
Wow.
Yeah, like that's how long it took, literally until my mid-30s was when I had finished processing the grief.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? I feel strong enough to actually go back to the past in my mind and force myself to relive all this to the extent that I can, write it chapter by chapter. And so it took about 5 years to write the book and refine it and get it to where it was in a publishable state.
But I think that's great. Like, you've got to take your time so you can make something that you're really proud of. The first season took me, I think, 3 years to put together in the end.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's 2 episodes that I absolutely hate, but it was just time, and I had to get it out there.
Oh wow.
I'm not going to tell you what they are.
Oh
but,
no.
He's the most critical.
I love the voiceover you do when you're kind of like doing a summary, and then you can still hear the conversation between you three in the background, but you're kind of doing a voiceover. I really like that effect a lot.
Yeah, people love that. I get a lot of feedback about that. Because the idea was I wanted a different voice in there.
Right.
It's almost like there's a fourth character that had its own personality that's, looking back and giving their perspective and
Judging.
That's
what you're doing.
Judging everything. But Angie, you should think about doing a podcast. The only thing is it is more time consuming than you expect it to be. I put a lot of time into this thing.
Well, that's because you do everything yourself. You do the editing, the music. It's all on you. Ellie and I just show up and talk, and then we We get lost.
Well, and then you show up late.
And then the computer doesn't work, and then he gets even more angry.
Well, and your microphone is crackling, which is super annoying.
It's really hard.
Yeah, he has full
Well,
meltdown.
and then you can't even log on or
I forgot my Facebook password.
Yeah, well, Angie, this is literally what was happening today. This is what I have to deal with.
You should have seen him. Oh my goodness.
Well, usually we record from different cities, but today we're in the same house, and fucking never again. It was the worst idea. So my wife Lily is Swedish, and we were using her computer. And like 2 minutes before calling you, we realized that we couldn't log on to her computer because it was set to the Swedish language.
Oh my goodness.
And she's still in bed, so I'm like pushing the door open. I'm running there. And I'm like, turn it to English. What are you doing? We don't speak Swedish here. Yeah, but it worked out.
Right.
So also the other thing that I've got here is it says that you're an artist. Is that right?
That is the latest form that my creativity is taking. So I largely do collages. That was something I used to do in my early 20s. It was something I just was really drawn to, and then I kind of fell away from creativity for a long time. And my new life partner is an artist, and that has had a great impact on me, and it's been just hugely rewarding to be able to create. I just had to build a portfolio, and I've got like 60 plus pieces now of collage art. And the other thing I do is I buy images of classic actresses, screen sirens of the 1950s and so forth, like Marilyn Monroe, and I'll take this. It's on a canvas, and then I'll basically like paint on it. I'll add jewelry to it. I'll kind of make it really funky, and then I've also broken into upcycling recently. So I'll go thrifting, and then I'll take denim jackets and put patches on there, and so I'm just sort of like figuring out what my favorite medium is and where I can. I'm just sort of exploring where I can take this.
Angie, you seem awesome. Like you seem like you just go for things completely. Like I'm gonna write a book, and then you like write a book, and then you're like I'm gonna go and do stand-up comedy for a year, and then you go and do that, and then you're like, all right, I'm gonna go. I've never heard what was it? Uplifting?
Upcycling.
Upcycling, yeah.
Upcycling.
Cycling.
I've never heard that before. I'm going to be an upcycler. I thought
You better get with it.
I imagined a unicycle that flew.
What?
Like, that's what I was thinking of. Upcycling. That's going to be my stand-up routine. Hey,
Ellie's very creative.
It's true.
You do all those little arts
Yeah.
and crafts.
I do.
Not as good as Angie though. Angie's much better than
Oh,
you.
jeez.
As soon as you said upcycling, I knew what it meant.
You're a shell collector. That's what you are.
I don't
You're
collect.
a shell collector.
They're not
Sea
shells.
glass.
Glass,
sea
sea glass.
I love that.
Oh, do you?
I love collecting shells and sea glass. I have a massive amount collected that I'm like, how am I going to use this in art? And I've been kind of puzzling over it, and I haven't figured out how to use it yet, but I'm going to get there. But what I will say is because my mother kind of flitted around from goal to goal so much, I'm very hyper conscious of, I'm like, does this make me like her? Do I need to be concerned? But so far when I've talked to my therapist, they feel that my creative outlets are healthy, and that, I have a 6-year-old daughter, and I haven't abandoned her yet. So luckily it looks like I'm on the right track, but every day I have to ask myself, like, am I too similar to her? Like, am I switching interests too much? But I think even when it seems like something new is bubbling up, it's really kind of the same theme, because like I said, I used to do the collaging back in my early 20s, and I just kind of came back to it. So it's like there's a common theme to all of them, the comedy and the writing. These have always been interests for me.
That's what I was going to say. It's all on the creative aspect. Like, it's not like you're turning into a bodybuilder and then a firefighter.
Right.
They're two completely different things, whereas this is all on the same line of thought.
Yeah.
Are you like crazy with the type of sea glass? Like I went to the beach with Ellie, and then we were finding sea glass, and I picked up a piece of green glass, and I was like, wow. And she's like, it's useless. I've got tons of those. Green is the boring one. I was like, okay.
Yes.
You realize you can just buy a bottle and smash it, and then you can get all the glass you want of any color.
Yeah, but it's not smooth. It's not tumbled by the waves.
Buy a sandblaster or something and just blast it.
No.
Yeah, same effect. I think I just cracked it. There was that silence there. I just cracked it. You're like, oh my God. I've spent all these hours searching for glass.
Yeah, but it's not sandblasted.
You're so not creative in that way.
The satisfaction is like treasure finding,
Yes, it is treasure finding. There's something that happens in your brain. It's almost like a hit, of like, I don't know, when people do drugs and they're chasing the dragon, right? Like I get this dopamine hit every time I find a great shell or another piece of sea glass, And so I would never buy any of those. I can't buy them. I got to find them. There's like a sense of honor there that I found in myself.
I'm not enjoying you making these valid points, Angie. You're supposed to agree with me. It's not a 3-on-1 here.
No,
It's like...
it's the girls against the boy. It always is.
Sorry, we're siding
No,
with
it's-
Angie.
it's-
Sorry.
Whatever. You can all go glass hunting if you want to in your spare time.
Don't
That's
worry,
fine.
we'd have a great time.
Yeah, I bet you would.
Yeah, we would.
I've got like I keep saying I've got nothing else. It's been awesome talking to you. I think in the future as we do episodes, if I got back in touch with you and said, hey, I've got an episode and I want an opinion or something, would you be interested in coming on once in a while maybe?
Absolutely. Please do reach back out. This has been so much fun talking with you three. I would absolutely love to come back on anytime you want to have me.
Have you done many interviews and things? I don't know how much you do on the...
This is only my second one so far.
Second one.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it's the best one by far. For
Of
sure.
course.
This has been very fun. I truly enjoyed myself.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, I might let you go. Is there anything else anyone wants to say apart from telling Angie how awesome she is, which I've done multiple times
Thank
now?
you. And your accent is great.
You know, that's terribly cute. I love that you said that because I was like, don't tell them you love their accents. I don't want to offend you, but yeah, and listening to your podcast, I'm like, these guys sound just so cute with the way they're talking to each
really?
other. That's a wonderful Brisbane accent.
Yeah.
I love it.
Well, I'm the only Brisbane one here. We're all from different cities, so
Oh,
we're
okay.
all over the place. Yeah.
Well, you know, keep at it. You guys are doing something great here, and you're really reaching people. You know, as soon as I found your podcast, I was like, oh my gosh, I got to get on there.
I will read the book too. So I actually have a thing now. I try and read 12 books a year. And the
Yep.
wife, she reads like crazy. She's actually the boss of a book club, so she's good influence. And,
Yeah,
and
I
might
think
relate
I'm going to
to
read it too. It
Yeah,
sounds
put
very
it in a
interesting.
book club.
Yeah, that's a good idea, actually.
It's a really good idea.
We'll get some copies sold.
Very cool.
Now, in return, I want you to get me 1,000 downloads. Go.
Oh my
Go to work.
I will do it. I'm going to start spreading the word.
All good. All right, I'm gonna stop now.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much for your time. Yeah, thank you for making this such a wonderful conversation.
Awesome.
I'm not sure what I was expecting from the recording with Angie.
Thanks a lot.
I always assumed she'll be smart and funny. I mean, she is an author who does stand-up comedy in her spare
She
time.
was awesome, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's good. She's very interesting.
I'd also expected her to have an engaging story, which she totally did.
The story sounds really interesting, actually. I want to read a book.
Yeah, I want to read the book too.
But what I was really hoping for, if I'm being totally honest with myself, was
I
validation.
actually thought we had more in common than I expected.
Validation from another creator going through a similar process to
The
ours.
stories are a bit different, but the process and everything she's going through seems really similar.
And so to Angie for giving me all of these things, wrapped up neatly in our season 2 finale, I just want to say thank you.
Yeah, and then she's like, you've got a great podcast here. It's going to help a lot of people. And then your head's just going,
That's great.
And to anyone else out there looking for a platform to share their story in a way that only the fucked up family detectives can, well, we are now open for business and contactable via the links in the description.
I got to find out what an ashram was.
oh, God.
That's the most... Did you hear me? Did you hear me getting that?
I heard you. We heard you.
That's very important. I was like, okay. And she wasn't going to mention it either. She slipped by because that wasn't part of her story. So I'm like, where's the ashram? Why hasn't she brought it up yet?
No, I like you threw in the yogi as well. With the yogi? She's like, yeah.
If you enjoyed today's episode, or if you think that you might want to be part of a future one, please let us know about it in the email or Reddit links that are in the description. Walking on Eggshells with an Emotional Vampire is produced, recorded, and edited by me, Lucas Shaw. Thanks for listening.